Alrighty. Let's get this shindig going. Hi, welcome to my channel. I am following along with the Rooted in the Word reading plan. If you don't have it, I will have it linked in the description if you want to join us and follow along. Today, we are going to talk about Corinthians. Last week, we started on Corinthians 1:1. In the plan, video pretty much just talked about Romans. This week, we are getting a few more chapters into Corinthians. But I feel that it's important to start Corinthians with Corinth, knowing the geography and the culture of the time kind of helps make the book or the letter of Corinthians make a little more sense. So first, join me at our map. I'm going to zoom out a little bit. This is obviously the Mediterranean Sea here. We're going to zoom in on Greece here. So this is modern day map. So obviously it would look a little different back in ancient times. But here's modern day Athens. And at the time, Sparta was a big deal. Sparta is in this area down here. So Corinth is right here. Corinth would have been roughly halfway between Athens and Sparta down here. So it is a very wealthy city due to all the trade that passes through it. And it is geographically positioned very well. So Corinth is here, right on this isthmus that connects mainland Greece with the Peloponnesian Peninsula here. So if we zoom in, Corinth right here, this little section of the isthmus is roughly 4 miles or so wide. So Corinth can very easily control trade north and south by controlling this isthmus. So any Greek trade going from the peninsula to the mainland or from the mainland to the peninsula has to travel past Corinth. Meaning Corinth is very wealthy due to all the trade that is coming through it. But beyond that, Corinth is also very well situated for east-west trade. This is obviously a slightly different map. This is a map of isthmus here. So Corinth not only controlled the north-south trade, they also controlled the east-west trade from the Gulf of Corinth to the Saronic Gulf. So they actually had a road. Today we have a canal that connects the two, making trade even better. Back then they didn't have a canal, but they had the road, the Dialcoast Road, which connected the two gulfs, and people would actually take their boat up, get out of their boat, carry the boat across, put it in the water, and continue their journey. Obviously, spending time and money in Corinth in the process, because you're gonna sell what you can at Corinth and buy new goods, buy trades, wares, and provisions to get you further on your journey. There. And people would willingly do this carrying their boat because the way seafaring was back then. It's much easier to ford it here and carry across for 4 miles than it is to go the 400 to 600 miles around to the other side. So back then, seafaring wasn't what it is today. So people generally stayed pretty close to the coast. So if you're gonna swing around, you're kind of gonna follow the coast here more so than just skipping from point to point to point to point to get to where you need to go. So if somebody was trying to do trade from Athens to Patras, they're gonna go this way, come down, ford the isthmus, and go across, or maybe even walk, take the land route. Either way, you're passing through Corinth. And with all of Corinth's wealth, Corinth was also well known for their temple to Aphrodite, which is the Greek goddess of love. So this temple had temple prostitutes. So prostitution was not only generally accepted, it was endorsed by the religion of the time. So they had temple prostitutes that you could go visit. So that was another reason why people like to stop at Corinth on their travel journeys. And another reason why Corinth was so wealthy, because people are going to stop there, they're going to spend a lot of money and spend time on prostitutes and alcohol and everything else. So when we're talking about Corinth, kind of need to think of Corinth as the city of sin. So it's the Las Vegas of ancient Greece, but on a beach. So think of it kind of like that when we're talking about Corinth here. Paul introduces the letter, basically saying, don't let there be division amongst the church, because there's all these competing forces in the area. You have the Jews there; they have a pretty good presence in the time at that time. Then you have all the Gentiles with their polytheism and all the pantheon of Greece, and Corinth was well known for the Aphrodite portion of that. And with that, they have temple sacrifices and prostitution as part of their common culture of the area. In chapter 2, Paul opens basically saying that he didn't come with lofty language or wisdom. He preached the gospel in very simple terms because he didn't want their faith to rest in him. He wanted it to be very simply stated and be resting in Christ, because there were divisions inside the church as to who they're following. And he also basically says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So he started the church, he got it started. He continued on his missionary journeys, and Apollos stayed there and tried to help grow the church and all that. So there are people who are saying, well, I got converted by Paul, so I'm better than you because you got converted by Apollos, and there's a bunch of division on that. He's basically trying to remind them we're all on the same team. We follow God, not man. So he says, I fed you with milk, not solid food, for you were not ready for it. And even now you are not yet ready, for you are still of the flesh. Basically saying that they're young believers, so we had to speak plainly and simply. And once you grow in your faith, you can take more meaty applications of the word and go deeper in your word study there. So he's basically saying that they're still young in their faith and that they essentially need things dumbed down. Not really speaking down to them, but speaking plainly and simply so that they can understand without going into all the weeds on all the other things that you can get uh, real bogged down on in, like eschatology, hermeneutics. You can get all these fancy words that just confuse people and throw them off. So he's basically saying, we're just speaking plainly. I am presenting the gospel clearly and simply to you. And then he's also talking about the natural person does not accept the things of the Spirit of God, for they are folly to him, and he is not able to understand them because they are spiritually discerned. So he's also kind of saying that believers can't expect non-believers to behave like believers because they're not. So that we can't fully expect a non-believer to have the same moral standards as believers do. That's not an excuse to let injustices go, but it's things where if somebody in their free will wants to do something that you disapprove of, as long as it's not causing an injustice to somebody else, and they're a non-believer, it's kind of on them. You can speak truth to the situation and try to get them to feel convicted on it on their own, type of thing, but we're not to like cast judgment and shame on them with all that stuff. Kind of going on that with the Spirit of God and spiritual discernment there. Let no one deceive himself. If anyone among you thinks that he is wise in this age, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is folly for God, or folly with God. So that is kind of saying if we should base our wisdom on God's wisdom as believers, not on the world's wisdom. So we are to act in accordance with this wisdom and try to spread that wisdom on that there, with knowing that we can't expect non-believers to act as believers in a fallen world as such we live in. Being wise of the world oftentimes goes against what God says. Not always, but oftentimes. And then to be wise in God's ways oftentimes is to be a fool to the world's ways. So the world oftentimes looks at believers and the way they act and think, how foolish are they? That's silly. They should. Why get married before you move in together? Shouldn't you move in together to find out if you guys are compatible before getting married, type of thing? That is worldly wisdom. But godly wisdom says, no, don't do that. Get married before you live together, type of thing. So we can often look foolish to the world by trying to hold on to the wisdom of God. And the founding fathers knew this, I think. And our nation was kind of built on that premise. So John Adams wrote, "Our Constitution was made only for a moral and religious people. It is wholly inadequate to the government of any other." Benjamin Franklin, "Only a virtuous people are capable of freedom." James Madison said, "Republican government requires sufficient virtue among men for self-government." George Washington, virtue or morality is a necessary spring of popular government. And he cautioned that morality cannot be maintained without the church. So our founding fathers realized that democracy will only work, freedom will only work when the population has virtue, has morals. And in culture, generally, as we progressively remove God from the picture, the government inevitably will step in and try to take that spot, basically. So we get the government dictating our morals instead of God dictating our morals. And inevitably, if we continue down that path, government essentially becomes God, instead of God becoming God. Even to an atheist that doesn't believe in God, they essentially have government taking the place of God, as the government is now the highest authority in their life that tells them what they can and cannot do, instead of God being the highest authority in their life. I was listening to a podcast and they were talking about virtuous masculinity, because as a counterpoint to toxic masculinity, where we want to, basically, if we want to see the world become better, men need to be better. Because when men are doing good and taking care of the things that need to be taken care of, then everything else kind of falls into place. But what I kind of think was funny about it is just the word virtue. Virtue in its Latin form, vir, vir, is literally man. So virtue and masculinity are essentially the same word. So you can't be virtuous without being manly. Not as in you have to be male to be virtuous. Just toxic masculinity is like an oxymoron. The toxic nullifies the masculine, because those aren't people who are acting virtuous. Those are people who are taking advantage of their strength over others, their power over others, and belittling people. That is not virtuous. Therefore, it is not manly. That is not masculinity in my view. Thanks for watching. I would love to hear what you got out of this week's reading and the plan. Please add it to the comments and start a discussion here on that. So go out there and love God, love people. Have a wonderful day.